Hello and welcome back to Rocket Coffin Studios. Today I'm going to show you how I do a paint job on a nerf blaster, specifically the Alien's Pulse Rifle from the Nerf Limited line, and how we take it from looking like this to looking like this. Now, I don't use anything that is particularly expensive or complicated. One of my goals with this video is to show you that you can achieve a very nice paint job with very cheap paint. I used a couple of spray paints, some acrylic paints, but I did not use an airbrush or anything fancy. So here are the paints that I used: a base of flat red primer, Plastidip, two different greens, and then a bunch of different acrylics: a black, a gray, a gunmetal gray, a green, a different gray, a silver marker, and a clear coat. Nothing particularly complicated. So step one is going to be to take our primer and prime the blaster. Now I have done Plastidip first and then primer. I decided to try it backwards this time. You don't have to do it this way. This is just what I did. After primer, I did a coat of Plastidip. I didn't record that part, so you'll just have to take my word for it for the fact that, the blaster is black. So, after the Plastidip, we take the first layer of green, which is the lighter Spanish moss. Then I take the farm implement tractor green, and I lightly mist it over top of the blaster. The goal here is not to fully paint it, but to give it an almost marble kind of effect. And it doesn't show up super well on camera. You can kind of see it when it gets really close here, but in person it does change and sort of tint the colors by quite a bit. And you'll see once we bring it inside, the color is going to shift just a little bit because it is cloudy and overcast outside. So inside, we're going to use our wrought iron gray by Folk Art. We'll be using that on a majority of the body panels. So this lower section, now I could have used black, and wrought iron gray is very close to black, but I wanted to diversify the color palette just a little bit, because I'm going to be doing black on the handle. So I didn't want all the body details to be black. I thought the dark gray would sort of help to make them stand out if we use black for weathering or anything later. Here's the upper section of the blaster. Now we're going to move on to the shotgun pump action. And I'm just fast forwarding this along because it's not super interesting. We're just making it shift to a grayish black color. Now I'm going to do a second coat because the first didn't cover super well, so we're going to speed that along as well because, well, you've already seen it, so. And now I'm going to start taking the wrought iron gray and putting some detail work on a couple other spots on the blaster. Saw me do the safety release, and now we're knocking out a couple of the nuts and bolts and little details that look like they would benefit from a little extra color. Now, if I hadn't mentioned it, this is not going to be a movie accurate blaster. This is actually a commission, and the customer had some very specific ideas about the color scheme. So you will see certain colors are going to change as we progress, which is just a natural way that commissions and things work when you're dealing, over long distances and communications and stuff. So a couple of the colors that you see me put down are going to change before the video is over. I went ahead and used black on the barrel because black would be a very good base color. And then black to go into a couple of these little shadows, recess areas, as well as the actual triggers themselves. So this is close to a movie accurate paint job. Not entirely, but if you didn't know, the movie blasters are actually brown, they just look olive drab. But the customer wanted to go with green, which I prefer the green look myself. But now I'm doing a really fun part. This is where I take black and I just go around and sort of do a cell shading effect. Just making little black ink blots all over your different corners and anywhere that needs some three-dimensional look to it. The whole idea is to highlight the edges with a sort of non-uniform pattern that will make it look like the paint is worn down. What we'll do after this is go in with silver and cover up a good portion of the black, not all of it. You still want some of the black to show through, but we'll cover up the black with silver so it looks like it's actually paint that has chipped away. It is a super fun process because there's not really a right or wrong way to do it. It just helps if you study some pictures of how metal and things that are painted sort of chip away, but it's a fun technique because it's hard to mess it up. And if you mess it up, you just, go a little bit bigger with the pattern or the damage. Battle damage is the saving grace of a lot of projects. If you mess something up, you can always just mess it up worse and essentially highlight the default. That's a classic technique I've used on a lot of things. Now this is the chrome paint marker. I'm fast forwarding this section because, like I mentioned earlier, that area is going to get repainted. So we really don't need to focus on the silver paint in that section. Now you can see what I was talking about. We put the silver as in the middle of the black as you can. You want the black to sort of highlight the silver. Now you could do it the opposite way, do silver and then highlight the silver with black. However, I find that using the black as a guide for the silver tends to help me. And the silver adheres a little bit better to the black rather than just the base paint, whatever color it might be. Unless you're painting the silver directly onto a black part, then you don't have to worry about it so much. But generally speaking, using the black helps the silver to adhere a little bit better to whatever you're doing. Now, I used to do this technique with a silver Sharpie marker, and it comes out okay, but the silver Sharpies are a little flat. So the marker that I'm using is by a company called Fly C, and it is the Fly C Chrome Paint Marker. And you can get a 3-pack of them for like $10 on Amazon. They're extremely useful. They have a really nice shine to them, and I've been very impressed with the results from them so far. And as you can see, I use it on a huge portion of this blaster. It's how I do all the silver weathering on it, which makes it a lot faster than before where I would do silver weathering with a brush. This, I feel like I just have a little bit more control, and it's revolutionized my process because I can go so much faster, and I do have that level of control that you get from a marker versus a paintbrush. So I highly recommend it if you decide to play around with any of these ideas. The chrome paint marker really is a game changer. And let's take a quick moment to admire the progress we've made so far. Looks pretty good. Next up, we're going to be taking brushed metal, brushed pale silver, and painting this little section here. This is sort of like the chamber for the shotgun. Well, it's a grenade launcher in the movie, but it's built off of a shotgun, so whatever way you want to equivalate that. And then adding in silver on what would be the receiver bolt for the Tommy gun. Because if you didn't know, the pulse rifle is built off of a Thompson submachine gun. It's a Tommy gun with a cool green body snapped onto it and a Spaz 12 shotgun heat shield underneath. Now we're going to run through this next part a little quick because all it is just putting a second coat of silver on the shotgun part and the receiver part. Nothing particularly new or different. Now for this next part, we are going to do things a little bit differently. The customer requested a little more silver, So I'm using the Folk Art Brush Dark Gray to go over a good portion of the outer body and change it from the blackish gray of the wrought iron to a more metallic, almost gunmetal gray. We're going to do that to these various tabs on the outside of the blaster, the upper section of the receiver, the upper section of the stock, and I did it on the barrel as well. I wasn't entirely sure what color I was going to do for the barrel, but that I'm going to keep referring to it as gunmetal gray, but the actual paint itself is dark gray, but it looks like gunmetal to me. So I did the gunmetal gray on the barrel because I wasn't entirely sure what color the barrel was going to be, but I figured that was a good base to go with. Now, after talking with the customer, we decided that the shotgun section should be less gunmetal and more dark gray. So I'm using apple barrel dark granite to change the color of that section. And we're going to go ahead and fast forward here in just a second because it's a good color, but it took a couple of coats to put on. So let's just speed up a little bit. Now, while I was painting this section, I noticed that the tab at the back was a little bit less than satisfactory. So I went back and touched it up before moving on to the next section. So using the Folk Art Brushed Metal Brushed Pale Silver, we're going to lighten up the barrel a little bit. The customer thought that the gunmetal gray was just a little too dark for the barrel. So we do that, and it gives us a pretty nice contrast between the two parts. Now next up, I take some of the brushed pale silver and I touch up the shotgun chamber section. I had gotten some of the dark granite on there earlier when I was painting it. Now this is a fun little part. I take black and I go in and color all of these little spots on the heat shield. This way it'll look more like the heat shield has actual depth and shadow to it. It's tedious, but the result looks really nice, and I just wipe away the excess with my finger whenever it's a little bit too messy. So with the heat vents taken care of, it's time to move on to doing the battle damage and weathering for the pump action section. I'm using the chrome marker again, and I'm trying to do it in a way that it's the areas that would be most heavily weathered are where the pump action would be moving at. Because, I mean, that makes sense. The pump would be what's wearing the paint away. So I try to do that in those sections. Next up, we're going to do a black wash on the barrel. That is taking the black paint and watering it down, painting it on, and then wiping it off, because not all of the paint will come off, and it will leave a sort of murky patina almost on the silver. It makes it look a little more realistic, a little more three-dimensional as it picks up some of the texture that's in it. So I go ahead and I do this black wash technique to all of the different silver pieces, as well as just rubbing black into some of the more heavily worn areas of the gun, such as the carry handle and near the magazine. And in a couple of spots I do black on some of the gunmetal gray pieces just to try and give them a little more three-dimensionalness, however you want to say it. Make them look a little more 3D. Now it looks good, but as always I want to try to make it look as good as possible. So using Folk Art Olive Green, I am going to go around all the edges and the undersides of the green parts and add this darker green to sort of simulate a shadow. And it's a little hard to see as I'm doing it, but when I finish I'll bring it closer to the camera and you'll be able to see. It's subtle, but there is a difference on the underside of some of these parts, which suggests that there is some more shadow going on. It's minor little details like this that really do make a piece pop, and I wouldn't say that they make or break it, but it really does add that extra little 10%. which is what I'm always looking to do with any of my pieces. Now, it would be easy to assume that we were done, but we still need to do the sides and edges with the black and silver weathering. So after a little bit of black, we get out the chrome paint marker and go back to work doing just like we did before, except now doing it on the undersides, the bottoms, the corners, all the spots that we hadn't gotten to quite yet. Now, I decided for the rail up top here that a black wash would be good, just to kind of give it a little more depth and detail. So I poured some black paint in, wiped it away, and it looks pretty fine without changing anything. So I left it as it was. Then I go around with the silver marker and touch up all those black sections to add the wear and tear that we've done throughout the entire blaster. And that gets us to this state right here, which would be finished. However, when I conferred with the customer, he had a concern that the barrel was just a little bit too light of a color, which I can kind of see looking at it. It looks a bit too shiny. So upon request, I went back in with the gunmetal gray and touched up the barrel to kind of change its color and make it a little more subdued and less shiny. To further subdue the color of the barrel, as well as make it match the weathering and wear and tear of the rest of the blaster, I go ahead and do a black wash on it. Now, it's important to remember when you do a black wash to check the other side of the piece. As you'll see here, some of the paint dripped on the other side, so I went ahead and just did its black wash right then and there. But paint will drip over and cause these bleed lines if you're not careful. Now here you can see how the color looks under direct table lighting, and this is with just lighting from the window, so it does look a little different depending on the light that it is in. And using Rust-Oleum matte clear enamel, I'm going to give it its clear coat. And this is a process that you have to be a little bit careful with. It is very possible to add too much clear coat, which will result in this sort of a glossifying or yellowing of a piece. So I usually do mine in very light coatings, and I move from one end to the other. Try not to overlap or overspray any sections. And we go over the entire blaster like this. And here is our finished product. I have it outside in direct sunlight so we can see some of the subtle differences between the colors. And overall, I'm very happy with how this paint job came out. It has just the right amount of wear and tear that it looks like a well-used piece of military equipment and not like it's post-apocalyptic weathering. Because that's always a challenge with weathering, is how much is too much. How much looks like someone that has not taken care of their gear because they've been just surviving in the wasteland for 20 years, and how much looks like a conceivable amount of damage to a piece of military equipment. And that can be a hard line to walk, but I think we did pretty well. So if you like this, please like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments if you want me to do some more videos like this. And until next time, Rocket Coffin Studios signing off.